Kyler Murray might be the Falcons' answer at quarterback, but signing him probably means you can kiss the Michael Penix redemption arc goodbye.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Locked On Falcons, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. And of course, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka the Jolly Green Giant. Been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we are breaking down the free agent linebackers available. We'll talk about Kaden Ellis' potential to get a top-of-the-market deal, some potential cheaper alternatives for the Falcons if he winds up walking, and sort of 3 guys that could help fill the void should Kaden Elliss depart. But we'll start off today's episode talking about the big news from yesterday, which was on Tuesday, where Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals agreed to mutually part ways. Very similar to the situation between the Falcons and Kirk Cousins. Kyler Murray will be a post-June 1 cut for the Cardinals next week, a week from today on Wednesday, similar to Kirk Cousins. And of course, it automatically raises the question of, could he be the Falcons' answer to, who's going to be their week 1 starting quarterback? And it gets us to having a conversation on today's episode talking about, the case for Kyler, some of the issues that you will have to, address with Kyler Murray. But the big selling point on Kyler Murray is going to be you're going to get pretty good bang for your buck, right? The expectation with Kyler and several other quarterbacks, we talked about this already with Tua Tagovailoa, is that these guys, because they are already being owed so much money from their current teams and soon to be former teams, that these guys will be willing to play elsewhere on the league minimum contract, which is going to be 1.2, 1.3, around that number this upcoming season. And when you consider the cost and the potential return in terms of the quarterback play, you're getting really good bang for your buck. If you sign Kyler Murray, you're probably going to get one of the top 16 to 18 starters in the league. There's potential for more than that with Kyler. The challenge is going to be, do you believe in Kyler being more than that based off of him in this offense under Kevin Stefanski? Because Kevin Stefanski's offense, Tommy Rees's offense, the Falcons OC, basically have the same offense as Drew Petzing, right? Who is the OC in Arizona now, the OC in Detroit. If you go back and just do, 5 seconds of Googling, you'll find out, where was Drew Petzing before he was in Arizona? He was in Cleveland with Kevin Stefanski. Where was he before he joined Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland? He was in Minnesota with Kevin Stefanski. So it's basically the same offense, and we've already kind of seen Kyler for the last 2.5 years in this offense, and it's been mostly middling. And that's why the assumption is going to be that it will continue to be that. Now, of course, the argument will always be made, the Falcons' talent is going to allow Kyler to flourish, unlike here in Atlanta versus him in Arizona. I think we can have a conversation about the hopefully better offensive line that the Falcons have, potentially leading to better outcomes for Kyler Murray, but we're not going to get into that. You guys just know, if you're a long-time everyday or listener of this podcast, the minute someone tries to hype up the Falcons' talent being the solution to all their problems, particularly at the quarterback. We've seen now 4 times with 4 different quarterbacks over the last 3 years with the same basic talent on offense. None of them could get over the 8-9 hump. And so that's why I will always kind of push back. That notion will always kind of rub me the wrong way, but we won't get into that on today's episode. But, there's a lot of issues that we can talk about with Kyler as a passer. Talk about the middle of the field stuff, his ability to handle pressure, the leadership concerns that have been plaguing Kyler, since he entered the NFL. But again, the main selling point of Kyler, at least on the field, is going to be his ability to create off structure and use his legs to make plays. He's going to be far better option in doing that element than some of the alternative options that we have discussed a bunch over the last month here on the podcast that are much more pocket quarterbacks like Tua, Joe Flacco, Geno Smith, Jacoby Brissett, et cetera. And so, we've talked a lot over the last, several months talking about, the different elements of your offense that are going to make your offense right on any given play. That first element is the play call. You want an offensive coordinator that can consistently scheme open that first read. If that doesn't work, then you want a wide receiver who's basically like, doesn't matter what you scheme up, I'm the caliber wide receiver where I'm just going to get open, right? Julio Jones, Justin Jefferson, Drake London, all those types of guys that sort of fit that category. But if that doesn't work for you as a team, you need that third element to make you right, which is the quarterback. And we've talked a bunch over the last year or so that Michael Penix, that's an area of struggle for Michael Penix. Hopefully we'll see some growth from him in the years to come, but that is not an area where Kyler Murray is going to struggle. His ability to, extend plays with his legs, to buy time for his receivers to make plays, or more often with Kyler to just basically like, I'll go do it myself. Now, there are issues when we get to that. And again, we're not going to unpack this fully on today's episode. But again, if the Falcons do wind up signing Kyler, a week or two from today, we will certainly be breaking a lot of this stuff down in the coming weeks and months. But there is data that suggests that Kyler is not as effective a scrambler today and has not been as effective the last couple of seasons as he was earlier in his career prior to that ACL tear that he suffered in 2022. And so the worry with Kyler is very similar to what we've seen happen with Russell Wilson, where his game is not going to necessarily age particularly well because so much of it depends on his legs and his ability to extend plays. And rather than being this pocket quarterback, both being sort of short guys that struggle, to see all levels of the field and in the middle of the defense. But that is not necessarily something that we're talking about today, because we're really talking about Kyler basically being this 1-year rental at various cheap. Now, we can potentially have a conversation about the long-term success of Kyler Murray, but, that gets us to our last point here, where if Kyler's just going to be this 1-year rental, the potential is there. If he plays well on that 1 year, do you extend him in 2027 beyond? And that leaves issues, right, where we've seen consistently, whether it's with Kyler in Arizona, Tua in Miami, as well as Kirk Cousins, right? There is a little bit of buyer's remorse when you're not consistently getting top 10, top 12 quarterback play out of a quarterback and you're paying him premium dollars. You feel like you want to get off that ride. And that's basically the situation that Miami, Atlanta, and Arizona now find themselves in. And so that will certainly be a topic of conversation potentially for the future. And then the other element is, the Michael Penix of it all, right? How does a Kyler Murray signing impact, Michael Penix's future? And it, to me, clearly has a negative impact, right? That we can have a conversation about all these different quarterback options in the sense of, who's a bridge and who's a starter and all that sort of stuff. But if you're just ranking the options that look currently available, unless someone else comes available that surprises us, the player that is going to decrease the chances that Michael Penix sees the field at some point in 2026 the most is going to be Kyler Murray, to the point that, Kyler has some injury history, but, if he's healthy, the expectation, I think, if the Falcons add Kyler Murray, is he's going to start all 17 games, and you're not going to get a chance to see Michael Penix in 2026. And if you don't get a chance to see Michael Penix in 2026, there's no reason for you to basically go like, well, we're going into 2027 with Michael Penix as our QB1. In all likelihood, you're going into 2027 either deciding to extend Kyler, assuming that this 2026 season goes well, or you're going in a brand new direction at the quarterback position, potentially in the draft, potentially with another veteran free agent or something along those lines. And so essentially what I'm getting at is, if the Falcons sign Kyler Murray, that's probably the end of Michael Penix's tenure, unless there's an injury and he can kind of redeem himself at that point in time. But that potential redemption arc that I know many of us are hoping for, is pretty much over. Now, I know there's a lot of folks, in any podcast I do that talks about Michael Penix, I always get comments and responses where you get some people that are fully, invested in Michael Penix's redemption arc and are just chomping at the bit for all the people that have been skeptical and doubting Michael Penix to get theirs when that redemption arc comes true. And then there's also the people on the opposite end of the spectrum that are like, well, Penix is done. He's not the answer. It's time to move off him. And so depending on which camp you find yourself in, and again, I don't think that's the majority of Falcon fans. I think the silent majority is somewhere in the middle between those 2 points and those two extremes. But depending on if you find yourself in that extreme camp of being fully in on Michael Penix or fully out on Michael Penix, that will impact how you view the Kyler Murray sign. If you're fully out on Michael Penix, then you probably think of Kyler Murray as like, this is a great move for the Falcons. And if you're fully in on Michael Penix, then you probably think signing Kyler Murray is the worst move the Falcons could potentially make. So I'd love to hear your feedback on where you sort of stand on that when it comes to Kyler Murray. And obviously, as we move forward next week, we can continue talking about the various quarterback options. For the record, if I'm sitting here today, I would not predict that Kyler Murray winds up being the answer for the Falcons at quarterback. We'll see how that plays out, but we got several more days to kind of see how it all plays out and whatnot. But I certainly think he's an intriguing possibility, but there are also those domino effects that involve Penix in the potential future that you have to deal with should the Falcons target Kyler Murray. But I'm sure this is not going to be the last time that we talk about Kyler Murray over the next 7 days. So we'll leave those conversations for the next week or so and continue today's conversation, breaking down the top of the linebacker free agent market and the forces that may be preventing the Falcons from re-signing Kaden Elliss and the potential pivots they could make if that is the case. And we'll do that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
So before we continue today's Locked On Falcons, I want to thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast. You are the reason why Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. And of course, the off season doesn't exist for the everydayer, especially if you join the Everydayer Club. You can join the off-season discussion about the Falcons year-round in the Discord, as well as get every episode of this show ad-free. And if you use the coupon code FREEAGENCY with no spaces, you will get a month free of the Everydayer Club. So go check it out at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. So we will kind of skim through this a little bit more. We did these breakdowns with the wide receivers and running backs on recent episode, but we're going to spend less time, obviously, because we spent a good chunk of this podcast already talking about Kyler Murray. So we're going to kind of skim through this a little bit more than we did with the wide receivers. And again, I think this is a good opportunity for those of you that are listening to this show to go check out today's episode specifically on YouTube, because we're going to have graphics showcasing a lot more information than we're going to discuss on the podcast. I have a breakdown of over 30 linebackers grouped into different categories that potentially will hit the market. We're not going to talk about all 30. We're just going to kind of hit the highlights. But, I broke it down similar to what we did with the wide receiver group, where there's 3 tiers: the top of the market, the mid tier, and the low tier. The top of the market are all the guys that I expect will likely hit, $10-12 million or more this year. And we got that nugget from Jeremy Fowler of ESPN the other day, basically saying that Kaden Elliss is going to be one of the top 3 highest paid off-ball linebackers this offseason. Now, I have 4 guys at the top of the market. Kaden is number 4 on that list in terms of, annual salary, with projecting him on a $12 million a year deal, 3 years, $36 million. And again, as a reminder, these projections are just guesses. Now, obviously, if I get them right, I will absolutely claim that I am the smartest man ever. But if they're wrong, then I'll be like, they're just guesses. It's not that serious or whatever. But, the other 3 guys I have at the top of the market that I expect and I'm projecting to get paid slightly more than Kaden Elliss, simply because they're younger: Devin Lloyd, who I'm projecting at $19 million a year; Quay Walker, $15 million a year; and Devin Bush, Jr., at $14 million a year. And at the $12 million price tag that I'm projecting for Kaden Elliss, I have a hard time seeing the Falcons keeping Kaden Elliss on at that price tag, just because I don't think the Falcons want to commit multiple years to a 30-plus-year-old linebacker. And then you also couple that with how deep this 2026 linebacker draft class is alleged to be. And if you're watching on YouTube, we have 13 guys that are listed in the mid-tier, right? And all of those guys I have projected to get like 1 or 2 year deals. And a lot of those guys are 30 plus years old. Notable ones include, guys that we as Falcon fans are very familiar with, like Demario Davis and Levante David, Bobby Wagner, Matt Milano, etc. And I expect these are going to be shorter contracts because I think teams are going to be only willing to commit 1 or 2 years to these guys as sort of bridge linebackers and basically come in, be our starter for 1 year, and we're going to try to draft a replacement in April. And I don't think Kaden is going to fall under that, although I think the Falcons would absolutely love it if his representation is willing to acquiesce to such a similar type of deal, is because, he has that pass rush ability. And we've seen in the past with guys like Zach Bond and Frankie Louvu that, teams are willing to pay a little bit more for off-ball linebackers that have that pass rushing upside, right? And so, I expect if the Falcons do go out in free agency and rather than waiting to the draft, they're going to target potentially one of these mid-tier guys to replace Kaden Elliss and then hope to find that long-term solution more in the draft. Quincy Williams is the one name that truly jumps out to me, having played for Jeff Ulbrich in New York, and makes sense on a 1 year deal. I'm projecting at $5 million. Again, guessing that number could be higher or lower than that by a few $1 million, but I feel like $5 million is a good projection. But in that middle tier, there's a couple of young guys that stand out that if the Falcons are willing to spend a little bit more money and willing to commit more of a multi-year contract, I do think there will be options there in that mid-tier. That's Nakobe Dean and Leo Chenal. Both of these guys are only going to be 25 years old this year, and maybe I'm lowballing their projections because there's only a handful of guys that are, proven starters that are under the age of 30. Now, the challenge for Dean and Chenal is going to be they do have concerns, and that's why I'm putting them in the mid-tier as opposed to the top of the market. I have Dean projected on a 2-year, $21 million deal, Chenal 2 years, $20 million right after that. And Dean has durability concerns, but when he's been healthy, he's been a good player. He just hasn't been that healthy that much over his 4 years in Philadelphia. And Chenal kind of is basically a young Kaden Elliss, where his career kind of in trajectory kind of mirrors that of Kaden Elliss as a guy that, can be a pass rusher, primarily, thrives as a pass rusher, but has been primarily a backup during his rookie deal, but, has been a more of a role player, similar to what we saw with Kaden Elliss in that last year in New Orleans. I'm not expecting the Falcons to sign either Dean or Chenal, but I'm sure there are going to be plenty of people in this fan base that would be very much in favor of signing those guys. You have Nakobe Dean. Given the Georgia connection, it's kind of the do-over that I know a lot of fans would like to see this team do from that 22 draft when they drafted Troy Anderson instead of Nakobe Dean at that point in time, and living to regret that. Chenal, again, basically having a very similar skill set as Kaden Elliss, and basically like at 25, it's like when we signed Kaden Elliss, he was like 28, and it's like, oh well, could we get 5 years of Leo Chenal as opposed to just 3 years of Kaden Elliss and that sort of mindset. And so, again, I expect the Falcons to target one of these mid-tier guys to be that bridge starter in 2026 with the goal of finding that long-term solution. Again, if I was betting, I would bet it would be Quincy Williams. But we did talk a little bit about Jeff Ulbrich talking about, if they do lose Kaden Elliss, when he was asked about it, it's like Kaden Elliss is such a pivotal part and such a good player that we couldn't just sign one guy or draft one guy that could replace him, right? It would take potentially 3 guys, multiple guys. I don't know if he said exactly 3. I think he said multiple guys. And in my head, I'm saying 3, right? Because that fits my narrative. But, it'll take 3 guys to replace Kaden Elliss. And we'll break down sort of the 3 guys that I would, in theory, target if that is the case to replace Kaden Elliss, and we'll get into that, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. March is a time that we celebrate women, especially around International Women's Day that is coming up this Sunday, and we recognize how much the women in our lives carry, whether it's at work and relationships in the family. They have so many unseen roles that they have to step into every single day. And it's easy to celebrate that strength, but it's just as important to make space for their emotional well-being. And that honestly goes for all of us. I think about my mother and all the things she had to carry, excuse me, raising 3 sons, and the challenges that come with that, the roles, the expectations, the pressure, all that sort of stuff. And therapy can help us deal with a lot of that, creating balance, setting healthy boundaries, supporting our overall well-being. And with BetterHelp, that's a great way to start helping get some of the support for some of the things that we carry. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served worldwide, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, and it works. You just fill out a short questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and if it's not the right fit, you can switch at any time. So your emotional well-being matters. Find support and feel lighter in therapy by signing up and getting 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's betterhelp.com/lockedon. So, earlier this month and a couple of times since, when we, broke down the linebacker position, I basically said, my goal, if I'm the Atlanta Falcons, right, if Ian Cunningham is calling me up and being like, Aaron, we need some help to figure out what our offseason strategy is. This team better than anybody else on the planet, right? And I'm like, oh, Ian, I'm so humble. Please don't put that on me. But, whatever you need, my guy. But, we want to add 3 linebackers this offseason specifically, right? And I'm assuming that we're going to try to carry 5 linebackers on the roster, and we can rank them kind of in a hierarchy. 2, I think, are already on the team. One of those is Divine Diablo in terms of number 1. Then number 5 on the list, we'll skip 2 through 4, is either going to be Troy Anderson or JD Bertrand, right? Those guys are going to come in and compete for the job. And then your number 2 guy is either going to be Kaden Elliss, if you're successfully able to retain him, or whoever you sign to replace him. Number 3, I think, is the rookie that you're probably going to target in the middle rounds of the draft, somewhere between round 2 and 4. And then number 4 is a depth guy that can come in and probably mainline in playing special teams. But if there are injuries, you feel comfortable with him starting games much more so than you felt comfortable with JD Bertrand and other guys. Now, Josh Woods, Ronnie Harrison, 2 impending free agents here in Atlanta. To me, if you do decide to bring both of those guys back, which I think makes sense, to me, that you bring them back to compete for the 5th spot, not to take, either the 3rd or 4th spot, right? And so there's a world where we're sitting here, in July, breaking down and previewing the upcoming training camp battles at the linebacker position here on the pod. And we're talking about 7 or 8 guys that legitimately have a chance to make the roster. But it's really like the top 4 guys are the locks. These are the 4 guys that, this current regime is choosing. 3 of them are ones that they add this offseason. And then the last couple of guys are just really competing for that last spot. And so the 3 I would add, probably again, assuming that Kaden Elliss prices himself out of Atlanta, is Quincy Williams as a cheaper alternative, that mid-round rookie. And as we get closer to the draft, I can probably give you a more specific name of guys or a guy that I like, but we're not there yet. And then a depth guy. And that's probably someone that I think is mainly a special teams guy, but has proven to be a functional starter when need be. The 2 guys I'm kind of circling are Chaz Surratt with the Seahawks and Jack Sanborn with the Cowboys. Surratt played in New York under Jeff Ulbrich, has been one of the more productive linebackers on special teams these last few years. Sanborn was very productive on special teams early in his career when he was in Chicago. He was part of that original undrafted free agent class that Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham brought to Chicago back in 2022, and then kind of got lost in the shuffle when they went out and spent big money on Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards a couple of off seasons ago, and he wound up in Dallas as a backup and depth guy. But when I look at those 3 guys, Quincy Williams, a mid-round rookie, and the special teams ace, I don't see those 3 guys as the 3 that were effectively replacing Kaden Elliss with. I think 2 of those guys are Williams and the rookie, but that 3rd piece is really the pass rush piece. And no offense to Chaz Surratt or Jack Sanborn, I don't think they're bringing the juice there. Williams is a very effective blitzer because of his speed, but it's very unlikely that either he or the rookie that you wind up drafting is going to hold a candle to Kaden Ellis's pass rush ability. And if you are going to, fill that void, then that probably comes in free agency at the edge rusher position. And so to me, it's like, take the $12 million that you could have spent on Kaden Elliss and apply that to edge, right? And bolster that pass rush, right? Bolster that 4-man pass rush, because you're going to lose that 5th guy in Kaden Elliss, as we saw the Falcons truly embrace the blitz second to only the Minnesota Vikings last year in terms of bringing 5-man pressures last season, and that being very effective, especially early in the season for the first like 2/3 of the season. And you're going to lose that as the Falcons look to try to, compensate with a 4-man rush by, potentially losing Kaden Elliss. And so, we're not going to be able to lean on that 5-man rush anymore. So let's compensate with that 4-man rush. And, you're sitting there going like, okay, Aaron, okay, let's sign an edge. Who's that edge? And I'm like, well, all good things come to those who wait, right? In other words, we'll figure that out later, which is probably coming in a couple of days from now on the podcast. And I'll probably have a name for you in terms of the guy that I'm specifically thinking we can land at a similar price tag as that. And, when we talk about spending in free agency, and we've talked before about the Falcons cap situation and the likelihood that there's going to be, if they are going to spend money in free agents, it's going to be a lot more low key, sort of those mid and low tier free agents rather than the big splashes. But I do think if there are two positions that the Falcons could justify, a top of the market deal, which we're talking 12 million plus or more at this offseason, I do think edge is one of those spots. And then cornerback, which is what we're probably going to get into on tomorrow's episode when we break down the free agent options at cornerback, are probably the two positions that I personally think would be most justified. Now, obviously, Ian, I don't have Ian's number quite yet. And so maybe Ian has a very different opinion of that as we sit here today. But that's kind of how I view it. And, as we gear up for free agency that starts this Monday with the legal tampering period, this is about me, guys. This is about me giving you my assessment of the free agent market. And then ultimately next week will be entirely about how the Falcons assess the free agent market with the various moves that they do or don't make next week. So, that's what we're going to do. So I kind of want to leave the edge and probably defensive line conversation for later in the week when we're joined by Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta. Because Jarvis, y'all know Jarvis, right? That's exactly, he's chomping at a bit to get into that conversation. But that's in store for you on future episodes. We'll continue with more content between now and then. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft for future content as your second listen to break down the draft as well as upcoming free agent moves. And how much is Alec Pierce going to get? Like, I saw a tweet today where it's like, oh, he's expected to get $27 million, and yesterday I was like, he'll get 25, and I was like, oh, maybe I lowballed that figure. Maybe we're pushing 30. I've seen some people suggest. So we'll see on that sort of notion. But I'll be like, guys, it's just a guess. Like, don't hold me to this stuff. But I've seen some people being like, I thought he was only going to get 20. And I'm like, oof. Oh, this is why you listen to me. No, kidding. Sorry, getting ridiculous here at the end of the show. So go check out Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft for your second listen. And of course, check out the Everydayer Club. There is no off season for the Everydayer. Get Locked On Falcons ad free, a members only Discord access, and more. And you can get a free month, right? $5 off if you're paying monthly, or I think it's $8 off, right? It's like 1-12, I can't remember exactly. Go check it out at the link in the description below for the yearly subscription. Right? Something like that. I can't do math. What's 1/12 of 50? Whatever that number is, you get that discount if you sign up with the coupon code free agency with no spaces. So go hit that link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. Check it out so that you can save whatever that dollar amount is that I can't think of, right? For those of you that don't understand, the way my brain works is one half of my brain is the language part of my brain. The other half of my brain is the math part of my brain. And when I'm sitting here talking to you, I can only engage the language half. And so the idea of trying to do math while I'm talking is impossible to me. Like 2 + 2 I can do, but anything other, division and multiplication, no chance. So whatever that, the minute I stop podcasting, I'm going to know what that number is. And then it's going to be silly to me. So whatever you do, go check out that link as the Everydayer Club. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.